Coming up, we're going to be talking about how a lack of courage is stopping you from living the life you want to live. What's up, y'all? My name is Josh, and I'm so excited to be hanging out with y'all today on the Crazy Good Talk podcast. Now, here's my goal. My goal is to help you find the courage to speak honestly about yourself. Help us find the courage to speak honestly about ourselves. Now, if it's your first time here listening or watching, I just want to say we're so excited to have you. And if you've been tracking with us for a little bit, we're excited to have you come back. Now, let me give you a rundown of what's about to happen next. Here's what's about to happen next. This is the welcome. This is where I get to set us up for today, talk about what we're about to get into, and then next we're going to get into the talks, right? The talks are the portion of the conversation that we're going to really be diving deep into at this point. And then I'm going to leave you with a question that's going to challenge you at the end of the day to try to apply what it is that you just learned, all right? And I want you to drop a comment in the comment section below and answer the question. I don't want you to skip this part. This part is going to be vital to what we do here, all right? So let's get right on into it. Today, we are talking about how I found the courage to speak honestly about myself. How I found the courage to speak honestly about myself. That's the name of this kind of episode that we're kind of getting into. And first, I want to kind of talk about what stops us from being courageous. I want you to think about it. What stops you from being courageous? I want you to think about it for a second. What is it in your life? What are the reasons that that make you not step up in the way that you feel like you should be stepping up in? Now, just in case you forgot, let's define what courage is, right? Courage is speaking honestly and openly about who we are, about what we're feeling, and about our experiences, good or bad. And we kind of talked a little bit more about this in another video before this, but that is how we're defining courage for the sake of this conversation. And yeah, that's how we're kind of defining courage for the sake of this conversation. I really want to get into the things that are stopping us from having courage, all right? So, but why should we have courage? Before I get into that, why should we have courage? Why is courage important to us? Well, courage helps you to communicate what you want, right? Courage helps you to identify what you want. Once you've identified what you want, once you've identified what your preference is, having courage is going to allow you to speak up and communicate that to someone else. All right. So courage helps us to get more of what we want, right? And we get a better chance of getting what we want. If we're not sharing our preferences with others, then it's going to be very hard for others to read our minds on what we want. So courage plays a big part in that. All right. And then courage also helps us in feeling heard, right? A lot of times we go through life and we navigate and we feel like, man, I don't feel like this person's understanding me. I don't feel like they're taking what I want into consideration. And a lot of times we're not even sharing what it is that we actually want, right? Let me stop. That's me, right? I'm speaking about me, right? Me not finding myself in circumstances where I'm upset with someone or whatever the case may be. Then I realize, wait, I've not communicated my preferences. Let that sit. Have you communicated your preference, right? Courage allows us to start to feel more heard in what we do and communicate our preferences. Now, what stops us from being courageous? That's what I want to get into. That's what I want to talk about, is what actually stops us from being courageous. And here's the first thing I want to talk about. The first thing that stops us from being courageous is the fear of being judged or rejected by others, right? The fear of being judged or rejected by others oftentimes stops us from being courageous. And I want to share with you a little story about this with me and my experience of how I've seen this to be true. Now, I remember a few years ago, I was working at this job, right? I was working at a job And I remember I had a great leader, one of the great leaders, and he was just super chill dude, super chill guy. And I remember he was big on like, hey man, I want you to communicate how you feel as we navigate this position. I want to know where you're at. I want to know where you're tracking with. I don't want to be left out in the cold of how you're processing things. We're learning a lot. We're doing a lot. And I want to be available for you to kind of help guide you and coach you through this. And to me, I'm like, man, this is great. This is great because if anybody knows me, you know that one of my mottos is to fail fast. What do I mean by that when I say fail fast? One of my mottos is that as I navigate life, I'm not going to be afraid to try things. And sometimes I understand that I will do the wrong thing. So I love relationships or friendships or just contexts where I can fully apply myself in a positive way or a negative way, and I can get feedback in real time about what is working or what's not working. That is my ideal environment. So I felt pretty good about this. I'm just like, okay, cool. Like, this is going to be great. Now, I remember running into some things, and I remember communicating with my leader, and it was very interesting because I mean, the first time it happened, I didn't really think too much of it. But the first time I kind of communicated what I was navigating, and I felt like he brushed it off a little bit. He brushed off what it is that I was trying to say. And I was just like, okay, well, cool. I understand different things, whatever. Maybe I didn't communicate it the way that I needed to communicate or whatever the case may be. And then the next time I communicated, and over time, I just realized that there was this pattern of when I would say something, I often would feel like what I was saying would be minimized. It would be minimized. So I would say, hey, man, I'm experiencing this. And it'd be like, well, yeah, no, but that's not that and that's not that. Or, okay, hey, man, like I'm navigating this or whatever. Yeah, well, it's not really this or it's not really that. And that was discouraging. That was super discouraging. And I think over time, what I realized was, I don't feel like I am being heard, or I feel like I am being rejected when I am bringing real things to you. So because of that, I don't no longer feel safe enough to bring things to you. Like, I'm not going to bring things to you anymore because every time I bring something to you, it's met with this minimization, or it's met with this rejection. And it's just like, I know what I'm experiencing. I'm trying to share what I'm experiencing. And I think to his credit also, I don't think that he was trying to be malicious. I think he was trying to help me to feel better. But in helping me feel better and not wanting to feel the discomfort of what I was saying, he created that environment to where it felt like you weren't listening to what I was saying. So here's what I learned in that, right? The fear of being judged or rejected will lead us to silencing and hiding our true selves. You see, over time, it was like, man, there's no point to sharing how I feel or what my thoughts are anymore if my thoughts are not going to be heard. So one of the things that's going to stop us from being courageous, you see, it takes courage to bring something to someone. It takes courage to share things with someone. And one of the things that's going to stop us on our journey to being honest with ourselves is when we feel rejected or we feel judged in what we're saying. And that's going to stop us from being courageous. And that's a real thing. And that's fair. That's what it is. All right. So that's one of the things that stops us, the fear of being judged or rejected. Now, another thing that stops us from being courageous is cultural expectations, right? They often dictate how we should behave, how we should feel, and how we should express ourselves, right? There are these unwritten rules that, hey, man, things are this way, and we don't go against things that are this way, right? There's a quote right? There's a quote that I like, and it says, it's better to walk alone than with a crowd going in the wrong direction, right? See, sometimes there are cultural expectations that will stop us from being courageous when we feel like something may not be working for us because it feels like it is working for everyone else, right? And in those times, in those moments, we won't have the courage to speak up and say, hey, you know what? It actually doesn't work for me. Like the way we do that and the way we navigate that, like, hey, no hard feelings, but that's not concurrent. And I think what we don't realize in that also is when we are brave and speaking up in things, it may not be in that moment, but it may give somebody else courage to sit and say, you know what, I actually that's not for me either. You know, that's actually not for me either. And here's the thing when it comes to cultural expectations or just like social norms, like it's not the responsibility of the other person to change what they're doing or how they're doing. I think as you interact with things, I think it is your job to realize what works for you and what doesn't work for you, right? So I think we see this in a number of different ways. We see this in when people are graduating and what school they go to, right? If all of their friends go to this one school. I remember when I was graduating, it was just like a lot of my friends were all going to this specific college and everybody was applying to this college because that's just what everyone was doing. Or even so, different career paths, right? I remember there was just common language. There was just a few common career paths where it was just like once one person identified it or a group of people identified it, we all of a sudden flocked and thought that, okay, now this has to be our trajectory. You can see this in the things that we buy. You can see this in the clothes that we wear. You can see that in the cars that we drive. There are societal norms that say, hey, this is this. And sometimes those external pressures can stifle our authentic voice, right? It can discourage open communication because it feels like, man, things are already set this way. Man, because I'm making this much money, I should now go and buy this car because this car says that I make this much money. Like, why accept that, right? But that's one of the things, societal norms is one of the things that's going to get in our way of being courageous, because it's just like the pressure to just conform to what is and not ask questions is very, very real. And for me, I saw this in Christian hip hop. I did Christian hip hop for about 10 years, and I remember starting as a rapper, and I was just trying to find my voice as a rapper, and I felt free. I could write whatever I want. I could do whatever I want. I had no expectations. I was just, whatever was coming to me, I was trying to just pen down and do what it is that I needed to do. And I was getting great feedback as a rapper. People were telling me, hey, Josh, I like what you do. Hey, Josh, you should probably do this or try this or do this or whatever the case may be. But back then, if anyone knows, this is 10 years, 9 years, 8 years ago, probably a little bit longer than that. There was this trend in Christian hip hop where if you weren't putting Bible verses in your raps, some people wouldn't consider you a Christian hip hop artist, right? So before it was cool to say, I'm not a Christian rapper, I'm a rapper that's Christian, right? It was before it was cool that the semantics of all of that. And I remember there was this one time where I was navigating and I was talking to a buddy of mine and he was just like, yeah, man, hey, such and such. I was talking to such and such. They really like this. But he stopped and he asked me, he's just like, yeah, man, like Josh is really nice. And like Josh could really spit. And like, I heard what it is and all that's good. But like, tell me something. Is it Christian though? Like, is it Christian? And he's just like, what do you mean? Yeah, it's Christian. Yeah, nah, but is it Christian though? And I remember when he told me that, what that dude was essentially trying to say is, hey, man, he's good at what he does, but it's not fitting in the box of what we've identified as a thing. It's not fitting in the box of what we as a society has deemed the thing. So does he need to double check that? Is that still okay? And I just remember that zapping some of my confidence away. And I had to like fight and wrestle with that because it was just like, man, I felt like I was doing what I needed to do. I felt like I was bringing what I needed to bring to the table. But then here he is questioning whether or not it's what I thought I was doing. Like, so that can be very discouraging again, right? But here's what I realized in that. I had to decide for myself, I'm going to have the courage to create what I felt led to create. I had to decide for myself that I was going to have courage to create what I felt that I needed to create. And let me tell you something, it was hard. Woo, it was hard. Let me tell you, I second guessed myself a lot, right? But I knew that I had to practice courage, and I may not have had the verbiage for this back then, but I practiced courage every time I wrote a song and let go of the what others thought it should sound like and just did what I felt like I could do, right? I had to decide that cultural norms would not dictate how I respond to things, right? I had to decide that for myself. Nobody else could decide that for me. That had to be a me decision, right? That was a me decision. So thinking about all of those things, it's just like when we think about the decision, when we think about the things that are going to get in the way of us and discourage us from being courageous, those are two things that I want us to think about. Those two things I want us to think about when we think about what gets in our way of being courageous. Not having courage makes us feel disconnected, right? Not having courage can make us feel disconnected from others. It's not like we're getting a real connection because we're not actually communicating the things that we want to communicate or the things that we value and the things that we want others to truly know. So maybe you're navigating this and realizing, man, my lack of courage in certain areas is actually what is fueling my disconnection with others, right? Because when we hide our true selves, it becomes difficult to form genuine and meaningful relationships, right? Or not having courage can also make us feel regret, right? We can regret not taking certain steps or not doing certain things, not taking certain actions because we didn't have the courage to do so. And they may have been things that we really wanted to do. You see, we may regret missed opportunities to express ourselves or to connect with others or even just to pursue other goals or dreams that we might have. And that's going to form what I love to call resentment. That very deep-seated thing that's inside of you and starts to eat away at you. You can feel resentment and feel frustration if you're not communicating and saying the things that you want to say. Now, I know you may be thinking now, like, man, Josh, you just gave us all of this. How can we practically start to navigate having courage? What are some things that we can do to start practicing courage, right? What are some things that we could do practically to start practicing courage? And that's what we're going to be talking about coming on up in the next section. Keep it locked to the talks.
Hey y'all, Bree here. I just remember when we first got engaged, really when we were dating, I said, I put a plate out for you.
And she put a plate out.
How did we navigate that? How we navigate the good things and the bad things. So on our YouTube channel, we just kind of talk about that. Give y'all some insight, not trying to give advice, because we know marriage can be this process that we go through. We just want to invite y'all along in our process. So just subscribe to our YouTube channel, and we hope that we can be just encouragement for y'all, and we hope y'all watch.
All right, so we're talking about how to find the courage to speak honestly, and we're gonna jump right back into the conversation. Right now, we're going to focus on the how. We're going to talk about how we can start to find the courage to speak honestly. All right. So here's what I first want you to understand as we jump into this. It is okay to be imperfect and make mistakes. It is okay to be imperfect and make mistakes. I want you to embrace perfection. All right. I want you to accept that it's okay to be imperfect. And I want you to accept the fact that you're going to make mistakes. Right. And I want you to not just accept that. I want you to share your flaws with others. I want you to share your flaws with other trusted, safe family and friends. Right. That's what I need you to understand. I want you to embrace the imperfection. But give me a second here. Here's what I'm not saying. As we embrace our imperfections, we know that it is okay to be imperfect, right? But what I'm not saying is, I'm not saying that there won't be consequences that come from those choices. Let that sit. A lot of times we want to fail fast. We want to get progress. We want to make feedback. We want to practice courage and think we're not going to do it without mistakes. But then we're going to realize, okay, you know what? I will make mistakes, but everybody's going to understand when I make a mistake, and it will not come with consequences. It will come with consequences, all right? It will come with consequences. You will, hopefully not to an extreme degree, but you will hurt people along the way. You will say the wrong thing. You will mess up. When you're trying this one thing, you will mess it up, and it will come with consequences. So we need to understand and adjust for that also. I'm not saying everybody's going to support you on this journey. And I think we need to understand that we need to embrace imperfection, but at the same time hold space to understand that imperfection will create certain consequences, and we're going to have to learn to deal with those consequences. Let me tell you a story. Think about my guy, Kobe Bean Bryant. If you know anything about me, you know that I love the guy Kobe Bryant. And Kobe, I remember when Kobe was younger, in his, I don't think it was his rookie season, but it was probably very early on in his career. They had made it to the playoffs. So let me break it down for you. Kobe Bryant, basketball player, former basketball player. Rest in peace, Kobe. For the LA Lakers, all right? And Kobe was going to be this really good player came straight out of high school and was playing on the Lakers. And they had made it to the playoffs. And while they were in the playoffs, Kobe was a key function in the team to kind of help the team win. Now, Kobe ran into a dilemma. You see, they got to the playoffs and they needed Kobe, and Kobe was shooting towards the end of this one game, which was an important game in the playoffs, and he was just shooting a ton of air balls. He go up, brick. He was just shooting a whole bunch of air balls, right? And I remember this is years later, Kobe had an interview, but it's probably like 18, 19 years later, and they asked him about that game. And they asked him if it was embarrassing to shoot that many air balls. And he said, yes, you can't take away from that. It's embarrassing. You got the whole world looking at you in that moment and you're shooting air balls, right? But here's what happened, right? So there were real consequences to Kobe trying his best and him being imperfect, right? And there were real consequences to it. It wasn't like, oh, guys, well, I shot some air balls, I'll be better next time. No. It caused real consequences, real losses in real time, right? But here's what he said. He said that he learned from it. He went back after that season and realized, oh, I've never played this long before. So we're playing into June, and I'm not used to doing that. Coming out of high school, we don't play this long. So I realized I didn't have my legs together. So I had to work out my legs over the offseason, and I didn't have that problem next year. So you see what I'm saying? There are consequences to being imperfect, but what we do with those consequences, what we can learn from those consequences, what we can draw from those things is what's going to help us. The lessons that we can learn from being imperfect, those things are going to help us with that. So you cannot have, you can practice courage without accepting, you can't practice courage without accepting the fact that you won't be perfect. Here's the other thing I want you to know. I want you to be true to yourself. Here's how we can start to practice. Another way we can start to practice courage is learning how to be true to yourself. That's such a cliche that's been said so many times. What do I mean by that? I mean, when I say that, what I mean is that you need to make decisions that align with your true self. Let me finish. You need to make decisions that align with your true self, even if they go against the expectation of others. Let that sit. Even if they go against the expectation of others, you need to make decisions that align with your true self. This is so important. All right? This is super duper important, because here's what happens when you don't. Here's what happens when you don't. You become resentful, you become annoyed, and you're not the best version of yourself. You ever try to do something where it's just like, you know that you didn't actually want to do the thing, so like you're not fully applying yourself to the thing because you know innately, like, man, I don't really want to do this thing, but I've not communicated I don't want to do this thing, so I'm just going to drag my feet, instead of I could have just put my hand down and said, you know what, I actually don't want to do the thing. I'm not going to be best suited for this thing. Right. And I know that there's a time for professionalism. I know that there's a time for not doing the things that you don't want to do. I'm not saying that you're going to live a life where you're not going to have to do things that you don't want to do. But I am saying that when you have control over that certain circumstance, I would think twice in doing something and accepting something to be done that you don't want to do, and you can clearly say no to that thing, because it never ends in a positive way. I remember when I was working in the car business, and I had started working at Honda, and I was working in sales, and I was trying to work my way up. And here's the thing. I knew that I was kind of in the business to try to continue to make money so that I can fund what I was doing with my music career at the time. So I was there like purely for that. But part of that was, man, I want to continue to make more money. And I think the dream I was trying to sell myself was, man, if I could just get into the finance office, because if you know, you sell cars, and then there's a finance manager that you bring the car to. So let me give you an explanation. So basically, the salesperson greets the customer, walks them through, sells the car, and then after, they pass off to a finance manager, right? And I wanted to be a finance manager. A finance manager does all the financing, the credit, the monthly payment, all of that stuff. They get all that stuff together, sell the aftermarket things. And I wanted to get to that because that meant you made some more money than the car salesperson typically did. So the average car salesperson. So I remember just kind of setting that as a goal, as like, man, I want to go that. I want to achieve that. I want to do that. And I remember when I got there, although I knew innately, man, this is not really what I want to do. I'm really just trying to use this to fund this and all of that. I remember when I got there, it wasn't too long into it when then I realized, like, man, this is not for me. It's not for me. I'm not being true to myself. I know that this may align with some of my skill set, but it does not align with where I'm trying to track and where I'm trying to go. Right? And here's what I want you to learn from that. Here's what I learned from that. Don't try to attain something that you won't be willing to sustain, right? Don't try to attain something that you won't be willing to sustain. And for me, I was willing to attain it. I was willing to work for it. But when I got it, I did not want to continue to do the things that I had to do to get there, because that was not what I actually wanted. Do not try to attain something you won't be willing to sustain. So let's recap what we talked about here. So we talked about the fear of being judged or rejected often leads to silence and us hiding our true selves, right? We talked about how that was one of the things that would stop us from being courageous. We talked about cultural expectations and just like societal norms and pressures and how that often dictates how we think we should behave and feel and how we should express ourselves. Those are kind of the two things that we talked about that are the things that are going to stop us from trying to be courageous. And then we got into the how. How do we start being courageous? We talked about how accepting that it's okay to be imperfect and to make mistakes, right? It's okay to do that, but we got to understand that it does come with its own set of consequences. And also we talked about how making decisions that align with your true self, to do that even if they go against the expectations of others, because you don't want to attain something you're not willing to sustain, right? You don't want to attain something that you aren't willing to sustain. So here is the question that I'm going to leave you with as we kind of wrap all of this up. Here's the question that I want you to think about. What are some ways that you can build courage in your everyday life? Courage is something that we need to practice. It's not something that we're just going to learn and it's going to be there for forever. So what are some ways you think you can build courage in your everyday life? I want to hear from you. Drop your comment down below in the YouTube comments, and I want to hear from you. Thank you so much for watching the Crazy Good Talks podcast. I've enjoyed hanging out with you. You have an amazing rest of your day, night, evening, whatever it is right now.
Thanks for listening to the Crazy Good Talks podcast. You can watch more of this podcast on YouTube. You can also find Josh across all social media.